The lobby of one commerce center at 7 in the evening is a particular kind of quiet. Not empty quiet. Working quiet. The kind that accumulates when the last of the daytime professionals have gone and the building hands itself over to the people who keep it running. The overhead lighting has shifted the bright commercial fluorescence of business hours, softened now into the lower, more economical setting that kicks in after 6. The elevator indicators glow amber. The reception desk is unmanned. The revolving door at the main entrance turns at longer intervals, admitting a cooler draft each time it moves. Gloria Watkins knew this quiet the way she knew the weight of her tablet in her hand and the specific hum of the freight elevator on the building's north side. She had been walking through this lobby on Tuesday evenings for 14 years. She knew that the third-floor hallway lights took a moment to warm up after being switched on a slight delay 2 or 3 seconds before the fluorescent tubes found their full brightness. She knew that the corner office on the second floor always left a coffee ring on the windowsill, the same spot for over a decade, and that her crew had been quietly wiping it away every Tuesday without anyone ever noticing or saying thank you. She knew the particular acoustic quality of this lobby, how sounds carried differently depending on how many people were in it, how her own footsteps sounded different on a busy afternoon than they did at 7 in the evening when the marble floors had nothing to absorb the sound but the walls and the air. It was a Tuesday. It was 7 p.m. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. The Watkins Professional Services crew arrived the way they always arrived. Efficient, unhurried, purposeful. 6 people. Supply carts loaded at the warehouse an hour earlier, each item in its designated position, each supply replenished to the standard quantity Gloria had established in the second year of the contract, and refined once slightly in year 7 when the building had added an executive lounge that required a specific set of cleaning products. Equipment had been checked, restocked, and signed off before the van left the warehouse. Floor assignments had been memorized years ago and were confirmed in the weekly schedule that Gloria sent every Sunday evening, a schedule that included not just assignments but timing estimates, supply requirements, and any special notes about recent building activity that might affect the evening's work. These were not people who needed to be told twice. They had the geometry of the building inside them, the way musicians have scales. They moved with the specific ease of people who know a space well enough to work in it without thinking who know where the obstacles are, where the narrow passages require a cart to be turned at an angle, where the floor has a slight grade that makes certain equipment want to drift left if left unattended. Gloria wore the Watkins Professional Services uniform, dark navy with the company name and logo embroidered in white thread on the chest. She wore it the way she wore everything, precisely. The tablet she carried had the evening's checklist, the crew manifest the contract documentation, and the building's facilities management contact numbers, all of them, the primary and the backup and the after-hours emergency line, which she had not needed to use in 14 years, but kept current regardless, updating them each time a new facilities manager was assigned to the building. Her building access badge was clipped to the front of her shirt at exactly the height specified in the One Commerce Center Service Vendor Guidelines, which she had read in full when the contract was first signed and reread each time it was renewed. She had founded Watkins Professional Services 18 years ago. Not from money, not from connections, from a single cleaning contract at an office building in the east side of the city, a van she made payments on for 3 years. And the kind of organizational precision that made her clients feel, without quite being able to explain why, that she was the most reliable person in any room she walked into. She had bootstrapped the operation through its first 2 years on the revenue from that single contract, and a second contract she landed in year 2. A small law firm 4 floors the partners exacting about detail and perfectly suited to the kind of service Gloria provided. She had hired her first employee in year 3, her second in year 3 4 months later. She had grown the company the way she did everything carefully, deliberately, never overextending, always ensuring that the quality of the work exceeded the requirements of the contract. The company now had 23 employees. The one Commerce Center contract was worth $180,000 annually. There were other contracts, there were other buildings, but this one had been with her from nearly the beginning, and she still worked the Tuesday evening rounds herself, not because she had to, not because she needed to monitor her crew, but because there are things a person does not stop doing when they have built something with their hands. Tuesday evenings at one Commerce Center were a commitment she made to herself long before they were a line in anyone's schedule. They were the specific act of staying connected to the work that had started everything. Tanya Reed was at the supply cart near the freight entrance when Gloria came through the lobby doors. 8 years with the company. Tanya had come to Watkins Professional Services from a larger commercial cleaning firm where she had worked for 3 years, and found that the scale of the operation made precision difficult. Things fell through gaps. Quality varied by crew. Nobody was accountable for anything specific. At Watkins, it was different. Accountability was not an aspiration. It was the baseline. Tanya had understood that immediately and had stayed because of it. She was the one Gloria called when precision mattered most, when a client had a special event the next morning, and the space needed to be right when a new contract started and the first impression had to be exactly what the contract promised. She had the same organizational awareness as her employer. She noticed things the way rooms were used, the way surfaces showed wear, the small signs that a space needed more care than the standard schedule provided. She was loading the last of the cart supplies when she looked up and nodded at Gloria. No words needed. The evening had already begun. The lobby desk was staffed by a man Gloria had not seen before. He was sitting when she came in. Mid-30s, white. He had the posture of someone who had decided to be comfortable in a role that required him to sit and observe. His name badge, she would later recall, said Carroll. He had been filling in at this post for 6 weeks, covering for a regular security officer who was out on medical leave. In 6 weeks, he had not requested the service contract log. He had not reviewed the vendor access documentation that building management kept in the security desk drawer. For exactly this purpose, a folder. Manila clearly labeled containing the current service contracts for every vendor with after-hours access to the building. He had not introduced himself to any of the maintenance or service crews who moved through the lobby in the evenings. He had not asked anyone to brief him on the building's regular after-hours personnel. He had formed his understanding of the building from observation alone, arriving each evening and watching who came through the doors and making assessments. The assessments were fast. They were certain. They were based entirely on what he could see. What he could see at 7 p.m. on a Tuesday was a woman in a cleaning uniform arriving with a cart crew. The rest of the world he filled in himself. He watched Gloria cross the lobby toward the elevator bank. He watched the crew follow with the supply carts. He watched and he assessed and he arrived at a conclusion without consulting anything. The building's service contract log sat 18 inches to his left in a manila folder inside the top drawer of the security desk. He did not open the drawer. He did not look at the folder. He looked at what he could see, and he decided what it meant, and what it meant to him was simple and certain and wrong. He stood up. Gloria had seen this moment before. Not here. Not in 14 years at this building. But she had seen it in other buildings, in other lobbies, in other rooms over the 18 years she had been building her company and navigating the particular kind of scrutiny that attaches itself to certain people in certain spaces. The moment when someone decides that what they have observed supersedes what is documented. The moment when a person positions themselves between you and where you are going and expects you to explain yourself. Not because there is a legitimate reason to ask, but because the asking itself feels natural, to them feels like authority, feels like the correct exercise of a role they have assigned themselves. She did not slow down. She did not speed up. She walked at exactly the pace she always walked, the pace of someone who has somewhere to be and expects to get there. The lobby lights were steady. The freight elevator at the far end was waiting. Tanya had paused with the cart. The rest of the crew had come to a quiet stop without being told. They knew how to read a room. They had been reading rooms with Gloria Watkins for years. They watched without watching the particular skill of people who have learned to be aware of situations without appearing to be aware of them, because appearing to be aware invites additional attention, and additional attention is not always safe. Carroll had developed a clear picture of who belonged in this lobby after 7 p.m. The picture had been formed without consulting anyone or checking anything. It was based entirely on what he could see. He stepped out from behind the desk and moved toward the elevator bank. The elevator bank was 8 steps from the lobby desk. Carroll reached it before Gloria did. He positioned himself at an angle that was not quite blocking but was clearly not inviting. It was the geometry of authority performed without credentials, the suggestion of a barrier made physical by a man who had not earned the right to create one. He asked what her purpose in the building was this evening. Gloria heard the question the way she heard most things in professional settings, cleanly, without emotional translation. She had learned to process information precisely before responding to it. The discipline had been cultivated over 18 years of building something in spaces that did not always welcome her presence. Spaces where she had learned that speed of reaction served her less well than quality of response. She had learned to hear what was being asked and consider what was actually meant and respond to the actual situation rather than the surface provocation. She unclipped her building access badge and held it up. She reached into the front pocket of her tablet case and produced a Watkins Professional Services business card, the standard one she carried specifically for this kind of moment. The card that had her name, her title, the company name, the company license number, and her direct phone number. She extended both items toward Carroll. Carroll looked at the badge. He looked at the card. He took neither. He said the badge might be expired. It was not expired. The expiration date was printed on its face in clear black numerals. It would not expire for another 11 months. The badge also had the building's logo and a security chip encoded with her access credentials that had been working on every elevator and every secured door in the building for 14 years. She told him this. She pointed to the date. She held the badge at a height where he could read the numerals without effort. He looked at the logo on the business card. He turned it slightly, as though examining something questionable, as though the card were evidence rather than identification. He held it for a moment. He said it looked like it was printed from a home computer. In the 14 years Gloria had been coming to this building on Tuesday evenings, no one had ever said anything like that to her. She stood with the business card in her extended hand, and she processed what had just been said with the same quiet precision she brought to everything. She noted it. She filed it. She did not let it show. She said, "I have a service contract with this building. I can provide the contract number. The access badge is current. My crew and I have a scheduled maintenance window beginning at 7 p.m. and running through 6 a.m. If you would like to verify our authorization, the facilities management contact number is listed in the service contract log at the security desk." Carroll looked at her. He looked at the crew. He looked at the supply carts. None of this seemed to move him. He had formed his conclusion before she crossed the lobby. She was offering him the tools to correct it, and he was not reaching for them. He said he would need to call building management. She said of course. She gave him the number from memory. It was the same number she had dialed once, 4 years earlier at 11 p.m. when a water pipe had burst on the second floor and the facilities manager had needed to be reached immediately. She remembered the number the way she remembered everything that mattered to the operation of her business, not because she had made a special effort to memorize it, but because she was the kind of person who retained the details that mattered, and the after-hours facilities contact number for a $180,000 contract was exactly the kind of detail that mattered. Carroll dialed the main building line. It was 7 p.m. The administrative offices had been closed since 5. The line went to voicemail. The outgoing message was clear, professional, and completely unhelpful. Carroll listened to it without leaving a message. He hung up. He looked at Gloria and said he needed someone to pick up before he could let her through. She said there is an after-hours facilities contact. The number is posted in the service log at the security desk. He did not move toward the drawer. He did not look toward the desk. She said I can give you the number directly. He said he would prefer to reach someone through the standard line. The standard line was voicemail. He had just heard it. He was standing in front of the elevator bank at 7 p.m. asking a woman with a current access badge and a documented service contract to wait, while he did nothing that would actually resolve the situation. He was not confused. He was not trying to do the right thing incorrectly. He was exercising a preference that had nothing to do with verification and everything to do with the picture he had formed before she crossed the lobby. Tanya Reed stood 20 feet away near the freight entrance. She watched Carroll with his back to her. She watched Gloria with the business card still extended. She watched the crew standing with the carts, patient still experienced enough to know that movement or noise would not help. She reached into her pocket and found her phone. She thought for a moment, then she held it up. At this point, the lobby door opened and a man in a business suit came through. White late 40s, the ease of someone who worked on the upper floors and sometimes stayed late to finish things, who moved through the lobby with the particular ownership of someone who belonged there in an unquestioned way. He was crossing the lobby with his laptop bag when he passed Gloria and looked up and recognized her and said, "Mrs. Watkins, good evening. See you next week." He kept walking. He did not stop. He pressed the elevator button and stood there reading something on his phone while he weighted the laptop bag over his shoulder, comfortable, unhurried. Carroll heard it. He heard the name. He heard the title. He heard the easy familiarity of it, not the greeting of a stranger being polite, but the greeting of a professional acquaintance who saw this woman in this building regularly and expected to see her again next week. He watched the man press the elevator button and stand there with his laptop bag with the complete ease of someone who had just spoken a greeting to a person he recognized from a professional context. Carroll went back to his access log. He looked at it for a moment. He did not open the manila folder. He closed the log and looked back at Gloria. He had heard the greeting. He had heard the title. He had watched the man walk away. He turned back to his desk. Carroll told Gloria to step to the side and wait. He said it without particular force, but with the particular certainty of someone who expected compliance as a matter of course. He gestured toward the lobby seating area, 2 chairs and a low table near the south wall. The kind of waiting area that exists in commercial lobbies for guests and visitors for people who have arrived without an appointment and are waiting to be confirmed. Not for contracted service providers who had been in the building every Tuesday for 14 years. Not for a woman whose company was named on a legal document in the drawer 18 inches to his left. He had not moved from the elevator bank. Gloria looked at the chairs. She looked at Carroll. She looked at her watch. It was 7:08 p.m. The cleaning window ran until 6 a.m. The arithmetic was clear. 11 hours was sufficient time. But 11 hours was also not infinite, and the schedule was calibrated. The 3rd floor took 90 minutes, the open-plan office spaces, plus the 2 conference rooms, one of which had been heavily used today based on the supply request she had received from the facilities coordinator. The 2nd floor took 2 hours, including the executive suites where the work had to be done to a higher standard because the spaces were used by people who noticed things. The 1st floor and lobby were last 45 minutes for the lobby alone, more if there had been a building event that day. All of it sequenced, all of it mapped, all of it contingent on beginning at 7. She walked to the chairs. She sat down. She opened her tablet. She did not sit the way a person sits who has been defeated. She sat the way a person sits who is managing a situation that should not be occurring, and is documenting it as she manages it. She opened the incident log she kept in the tablet's notes application, not because she used it often, but because she had set it up 3 years ago on the advice of her attorney during a different kind of situation at a different building, and had kept it current ever since. She noted the time. She noted Carroll's name from his badge. She noted what had been said and the order in which it had been said. She noted the access badge that had been presented and not accepted. She noted the business card that had been held and returned. She noted the main building line that had gone to voicemail. She wrote these things in precise, factual language. No interpretation, no adjectives. What happened in the order it happened at the times it happened. She had kept the incident log in the notes application for 3 years and never fully opened it until this evening. It existed the way emergency contacts exist in the background as a precaution, as the kind of preparation that you make, not because you expect to need it, but because the kind of person you are requires that you prepare for the things you hope will not happen. She had opened it 3 years ago after her attorney described a situation in which a vendor at a downtown parking structure had been denied access and had no contemporaneous documentation of what had occurred. The contract dispute that followed had been weakened significantly by the absence of a record created at the time. She had set up the log that week and updated it twice once for a minor discrepancy in a building's supply access procedure, once for a scheduling miscommunication with a facilities coordinator that had been resolved in 20 minutes. Both entries were 2 lines long. Tonight's entry was growing. She kept writing. Carroll moved back to the elevator bank. He stood there for a moment as though deciding something. Then he walked back toward the security desk. He stopped somewhere in the middle of the lobby, not at his desk, not at the elevator bank, but in the open space of the lobby itself. He repeated the comment about the company logo. He said it slowly. He said it to the lobby, to the air, to the general space where everyone present could hear him. There was no one else to say it to except the crew standing at the freight entrance with the supply carts, but his voice carried in the empty lobby the way voices carry in empty rooms with marble floors and high ceilings. He said the logo looked like a placeholder, like something you put in as a draft before the real thing arrived. He said it with the particular lightness of someone who is performing for an audience who finds the situation amusing in a way they expect others to share. He did not look at anyone specifically when he said it. He looked at the middle distance. He allowed himself a brief quiet laugh, not a loud one, not a performance, just the small exhalation of someone who has said something they found clever and is pleased with themselves. Tanya's phone was in her hand. Carroll's back was to her. She pressed record. There was a maintenance worker at the far end of the lobby near the utility hallway that ran behind the elevator bank. He had worked in this building for 11 years. He had seen Gloria Watkins every Tuesday for 11 years. He knew her the way you know people who exist at the reliable edges of your working life, their presence so consistent and so professional that they become part of the building itself, part of the Tuesday evening, part of the way the building transitions from its daytime life to its nighttime work. He had nodded to her in passing for 11 years. He had never spoken to her directly, but he knew her in the specific way of a colleague who shares a workspace without sharing a role. He had watched Carroll make the comment about the logo. He had watched the brief laugh. He had watched Gloria sitting in the lobby chair with her tablet documenting. He was standing at the far end of the lobby with a mop handle in his hands, and he looked at the floor, and he said nothing. He looked at the far wall and said nothing. He went back to the utility hallway. Gloria noted this in the way she noted everything, not with bitterness, with the particular understanding of someone who knows what people weigh when they decide whether to speak. She had been making those calculations her whole life. She knew what it costs a person to step into a situation that is not theirs and make it theirs. She knew that the cost is not always worth paying, and that the people who cannot afford to pay it are not villains. The math is just harder for some people than others. At 7:20, the lobby door opened again, and a security supervisor arrived. A different face from building security. Older, heavier, the practiced neutrality of someone who has been called to manage situations that are already past managing. He had been reached by Carroll through the security company's internal line. He came in already wearing the expression of someone who had decided on a course of action before seeing the situation. He spoke to Carroll briefly near the desk. He listened to Carroll's account. He looked at Gloria, then at the crew, then at the supply carts. He crossed the lobby toward her. He had a certain pace, not hurried, not casual, the specific pace of someone who is performing the act of addressing a situation while having already decided not to address it. He said that Officer Carroll had discretionary authority at the lobby security post for service personnel verification. He said that this meant Carroll's decision about access could not be overturned at the lobby level without a direct authorization from building management. He said he could not provide that authorization tonight. He said, "I can't overturn his call this evening." He said this with the tone of someone who understood that the situation was not ideal, but had made peace with that understanding quickly. It was not a tone of discomfort. It was the tone of a script that had been run before, that had been found serviceable, that did the minimum required to close the interaction. He reached into his shirt pocket and produced a card. He said, "This is the facility manager's emergency number. I'd suggest calling in the morning." He said, "I'm sorry for the inconvenience." He turned and walked away before Gloria responded. The apology was punctuation. It marked the end of the conversation without addressing what the conversation had been about. It was the administrative form of the thing Carroll had done earlier, the outward gesture of a role being performed while the actual content of the role was absent. Gloria took the card. She looked at it. She dialed the number. Voicemail. She sat for a moment with the phone in her hand and the voicemail's outgoing message still in her ear. She dialed the 24-hour security coordination line she had in her contact list, the number that was supposed to be staffed at all hours for exactly this kind of situation. Hold music. 3 minutes of hold music before she pressed end. She dialed the contract liaison number she had stored in her phone 3 years ago and never needed to use until tonight. 3 rings. 4. No answer. She looked at the crew. 6 people standing near the freight entrance with supply carts loaded for a full night's work. Crew members who had gotten to the warehouse at 6 p.m. to load and check the supplies. People whose evening had been allocated to this building, this work, this window. She stood up from the lobby chair. She walked to the crew. She spoke quietly enough that Carroll at his desk could not hear the individual words. She told them they would not be working the building tonight. She told them it was not their failure, and it was not a failure of the company. She told them she had the situation documented and would have it resolved by morning. She did not tell them what Carroll had said about the logo. She did not tell them about the brief laugh in the empty lobby. She gave them the information they needed, that the evening was over, that they were not at fault, that they would be compensated for the time, and she did not give them the information that would have been harder to hear and would not have helped. There was a calculation in that. She had been making versions of it for 18 years, the calculation about how much to tell the people who worked for her, how much to protect them from, versus how much to include them in what information served them, and what information simply burdened them without changing the outcome. 6 people who had come to do a job and been denied the opportunity through no fault of their own. They would go home and think about what had happened in that lobby, and arrive at their own conclusions without needing her to articulate it. She trusted them with the work. She trusted them with the building. She did not need to add anything to what they had already seen. They loaded the supply carts back into the van. It took 7 minutes. Nobody spoke much. The crew had been with her long enough to read the situation without being told, and what they read was that something had happened that should not have happened, and that their employer was managing it with the same precision she brought to everything. She drove them home. Across the city in the van with the supply carts in the back, and the cleaning window closing somewhere behind them at 6 a.m., she drove carefully. She stopped at the lights. She used her signals. She dropped each person at their home in the order of the route. She said the same thing at each drop-off: "I will have this sorted by morning. Your hours are not affected." She drove back through the city with the van empty. The streets were quiet in the way that streets are quiet at 8:30 on a Tuesday evening, not deserted, Not busy, just the ordinary middle distance of a city in its off hours. She drove, and she did not play the radio. She thought about the building behind her, and the morning ahead, and what the board meeting would require of her, and whether the footage request would land the way she intended it to land. She thought about the clean, factual thing she had written in her incident log, and what a board of directors would understand when they heard it said aloud. She thought about the camera above the lobby desk, a standard building security camera angled down toward the entrance installed when the building renovated its lobby 4 years ago. It would have captured everything, every exchange, every gesture. The comment about the logo delivered to the empty middle of the lobby. The brief laugh, all of it on a timestamp that would place it exactly in the record she was building. She thought, let the footage speak. In her bag on the passenger seat was tomorrow's board meeting agenda. Her name was the 4th item on the page. Carroll had not asked about the bag. She was home by 9 p.m. She sat at her kitchen table with a glass of water and her tablet, and she looked at the incident log she had been filling in since 7:08. She read it back to herself. It was precise. It was factual. It contained everything that needed to be there and nothing that did not. She read it twice. Then she called her attorney. He picked up on the second ring. He had worked with her for 11 years, since she had needed legal help in year 7 of the company when a client had disputed a contract term in a way that required more than ordinary negotiation. He had been precise and direct in that situation, and she had kept his number ever since. He knew the sound of a situation that needed managing, and he recognized it immediately, even though her voice when she described what had happened was the same as her voice always was, clear, methodical, without excess. She described the evening in the order it had occurred. She described Carroll's question, the badge that was not accepted, the business card that had been returned with the comment about the logo. She described the call that went to voicemail and the decision to call the main line rather than look at the service log that was 18 inches away. She described being told to step to the side. She described the second comment about the logo made to the lobby, the brief laugh. She described the security supervisor who could not overturn the decision tonight and who had given her a card and left. She described the calls that had gone to voicemail and to hold. Her attorney listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said the documentation is sufficient for a formal complaint. He said the access badge and the business card and the service contract are unambiguous. Your authorization was documented and current, and he did not look at any of it. He said if there are prior complaints against this officer from black service workers at commercial buildings, the pattern would constitute a substantiated basis for significant action. He said add a camera footage request to your board presentation materials. Not as an accusation, as a footnote. Something like, before we begin, I would suggest reviewing the lobby camera footage from 7 p.m. He said, do you have the crew on record regarding what they witnessed? She said she had Tanya Reed's phone number and that Tanya had been filming from the freight entrance. He said that changes things considerably. She thanked him. She ended the call. She sat for a moment in her kitchen with the water glass and the tablet. She thought about Carroll at the end of his shift. She did not yet know exactly what he had said, but she would learn it later from the incoming officer who gave a statement, and what he had said was this. He had told the incoming officer that he had turned away a crew with questionable credentials. He had said it the way a person says something they are comfortable with, something that sits lightly without weight or concern. He said if they were legitimate, they would have reached someone. He packed his bag. He said goodnight. He went home. He did not think about it again. He did not think about the 14 years of access logs he had not reviewed, or the manila folder in the desk drawer, or the woman sitting in the lobby chair with a tablet, documenting. He had exercised what he understood as his authority, and the evening was over for him, and he went home and slept without difficulty. Gloria opened her presentation file. She did not rewrite the whole thing. She had been preparing it for 3 weeks. It was structured and evidenced, and it said exactly what it needed to say. She changed one thing. In the opening section below the company overview slide, she added a footnote in smaller text. Security footage from the main lobby, 7 p.m. Tuesday, may be relevant to this morning's agenda item. She wrote it in the same measured register as everything else in the document. She did not write Carroll's name. She did not write the word incident. She wrote what the footage would show and let the footage speak for what words would diminish. She looked at the clock. It was 10:17 p.m. She thought about her employees. 23 people, 23 schedules, 23 sets of hours that were contingent in ways those employees understood only partly on the health of the contracts that generated the revenue that generated the paychecks. She thought about what it would mean if they woke up tomorrow with uncertainty about their schedules, if they heard something through the networks that connect people in any industry that suggested the company's standing at its oldest contract building was in question. She thought about what worry felt like when you were living close enough to your income that any disruption in the system had an immediate downstream effect. She picked up her phone. She called her operations coordinator first. Then she worked down the list. She called all 23 of her employees. She did not explain what had happened, the lobby, the badge, the comment about the logo, the brief laugh in the empty lobby. She did not tell them any of it because she had assessed that the information would cause the exact worry she was calling to prevent. She told each of them, "Your hours are not changing. Your pay is not affected. I will have this sorted by morning." She said it the same way each time, with the same precision, with the same lack of hesitation. 23 times she said it without uncertainty, because the uncertainty she may have felt, and she was human enough to feel it. The building manager had not picked up. The security supervisor had been dismissive. The footage request was an untested strategy, could not enter the voice she used with her employees. She had built something, and she was the person responsible for it. And the voice you use when you are responsible for something does not carry the weight of what you are uncertain about. It carries the weight of what you intend to do. It was past midnight when she finished the calls. She set the phone down on the kitchen table. She looked at her hands. She thought about the morning. The charcoal suit was hanging in the closet. She had pressed it last week, chosen it for the board presentation, because it was the suit she wore for formal contract discussions, the suit in which she felt most precisely like the person she had built herself into over 18 years. The leather briefcase was by the front door. Her presentation was saved and backed up. Her documentation of the evening was complete. The camera footage request was in the opening notes. Everything that needed to be prepared was prepared. She went to bed. She did not lie awake. She had done what could be done. What remained would happen in the morning, and she would handle it in the morning. 7:45 a.m. Gloria Watkins walked through the doors of One Commerce Center. Charcoal business suit, pressed, fitted with the care of someone who understands that how you present yourself in a room affects what the room can understand about you. Leather briefcase, dark brown. The kind of briefcase that has developed a specific patina from years of use, not worn, not damaged, just used in the way that good things are used. Her hair exact. Her posture the posture of someone who has been building something for 18 years and is about to walk into a room and present it not for the first time, not nervously, but with the particular settled clarity of someone who knows what they have made. Carroll was at the lobby desk. He had come in for the morning shift 40 minutes earlier. He had poured coffee from the machine in the security office. He was reading something on the desk tablet when the lobby door opened and Gloria came through. He saw her come through the doors and something shifted. The uniform was gone. The cleaning crew was not with her. What was in front of him was a woman in a business suit carrying a leather briefcase who moved through the lobby with the specific directness of someone who had somewhere to be and expected to get there. The geometry of everything was different. The way she moved, the way the briefcase sat in her hand, the way she did not adjust her pace or her posture to account for his presence at the desk. He processed this in the way people process things that contradict an assumption they have not yet recognized as an assumption. There was a brief internal rearrangement, and then from some part of his training or his social conditioning, or simply the reflexive response of a man who recognizes a certain kind of authority when it is dressed in a certain kind of suit. He stood up from behind the desk. He walked to the door. He held it. He said, "Good morning, ma'am." She said, "Thank you." She walked to the elevator. She pressed 3. The doors closed. He went back to his desk. She stood in the elevator and looked at the floor indicator above the door and thought about the previous evening and this morning and the difference between them and what that difference said about the nature of the problem. The badge had been the same badge. The authorization had been the same authorization. The company had been the same company. The difference between 7 p.m. and 7:45 a.m. was a suit and a briefcase, and the hour of day, and what Carroll's eye expected to see in each one. She thought about this for the 11 seconds it took the elevator to reach the 3rd floor. Then the doors opened and she walked to the conference room. The 3rd floor conference room at One Commerce Center seated 12. At 8 a.m. on a Wednesday, it had 9 people in it. 6 board members, the chief executive officer of the building management company, a legal representative from the management company's retained law firm, and an executive assistant who took notes and who would later describe the next 40 minutes as the most quietly significant meeting she had attended in 4 years in the role. The room was set up for presentations, screen at the front, pitcher of water at the center of the long table. The board chair was at the head. A man in his early 60s, with the measured, precise manner of someone who had run structured meetings for 30 years and had the patience for them that comes from genuinely believing that well-run meetings produce real outcomes. He had a copy of the day's agenda in front of him. Gloria Watkins was the 4th presenter. Her item was labeled Contract Renewal Review, Watkins Professional Services. The first 3 presentations moved through their time. A capital facilities upgrade proposal, a quarterly vendor cost review, a security protocol summary from the building management company presented by a representative who spoke for 12 minutes about the value of consistent standards and reliable service delivery, who used phrases like operational integrity and vendor accountability, who ended by saying that the building's security framework was among the most robust in its class of commercial properties. Gloria sat in the presenter's chair at the side of the room and listened to all of it. She held her briefcase in her lap with both hands. She looked at the presenter when he spoke. She did not register what she was thinking about the security protocol presentation with any change in her expression. She looked at him with the same attentive neutrality she brought to everything. The board chair thanked the 3rd presenter and turned to the agenda. He looked up. He said, "Our next presenter is Gloria Watkins, owner and chief executive of Watkins Professional Services, a 14-year service partner with One Commerce Center. Ms. Watkins manages a team of 23 employees and has held this contract since year 2 of the building's current management structure. Ms. Watkins, please begin." She stood. She walked to the front of the room. She placed her briefcase on the presenter's table and opened it. She took out 1 sheet of paper, her revised presentation notes printed that morning at 6 a.m., and set it beside the briefcase. She looked at the room. She took 1 breath, not because she was nervous, but because it was the breath she always took before beginning a formal presentation, the breath that marked the transition from preparation to execution. She said, "Before I begin, I want to note that I was in this lobby last evening at 7 p.m. in my working uniform. I was told that my access badge might be expired. I was told that my company's business documentation looked homemade. I was told to step to the side and wait while the officer at the lobby desk attempted to reach building management through the main administrative line, which had been on voicemail since 5 p.m. I and my crew of 6 employees were denied access to the building. The scheduled maintenance window closed at 6 a.m. this morning without our work being completed. I would suggest reviewing the lobby camera footage from 7 p.m. as part of your assessment of my company's standing here." Then she opened to slide 1 and began her presentation. The room was quiet. Not the quiet of discomfort. Not the kind of quiet that is really embarrassment performing the shape of stillness while it looks for somewhere to go. This was the quiet of people who have just received information they were not expecting and are processing it with the specific attention of people whose job is to understand situations accurately before responding to them. The board chair had his hands flat on the table. He was looking at them. His face did not show the specific emotion he was experiencing, but the quality of his attention, the way it had concentrated, the way the previous 3 presentations had receded from whatever he was thinking about, was readable. 2 board members looked at each other. Not quickly, not with the exaggerated exchange of people performing surprise. Slowly, with the particular steadiness of people who have just landed on the same thought at the same time. The chief executive officer reached for his phone. He put it back. He reached for it again. The legal representative had been writing. She had been taking notes on Gloria's opening remarks, her pen moving in the steady shorthand of someone trained to capture information as it is delivered. The pen had stopped. It was resting on the page, the tip touching the paper, and she was not moving it. 4 seconds of silence. The woman on the right side of the table. The board member who had said the least across all 3 previous presentations, but whose attention had been the most consistent, who had the quality of someone who waits to understand before speaking, said, "I would like to see that footage before we proceed." The chief executive officer was already on his laptop. He pulled up the building's security management portal, navigated to the lobby camera archive, entered the timestamp. He connected to the conference room's display screen using the room's Bluetooth system. The footage was queued and playing within 90 seconds. The room watched it. They watched the crew arrive with the supply carts moving with the ease of people who knew the building. They watched Gloria cross the lobby toward the elevator bank, and they watched Carroll step out from behind the desk and position himself in her path. They watched her produce the badge and the business card. They watched Carroll take the card and look at it and not take the badge. They watched the call he made, the call that went to voicemail, the call to the main administrative line that had been closed for 2 hours. They watched him gesture toward the lobby chairs. They watched Gloria walk to the chairs and sit down and open her tablet. And then they watched Carroll walk back toward the middle of the lobby. They watched him stop. They watched his posture, the slight opening of his stance, the tilt of his head. No audio. But posture speaks without audio. The shape of contempt has a specific geometry. The brief motion of the shoulders, the small exhalation of something that might have been a laugh, the way his body was oriented not toward the desk, not toward the elevator bank, but toward the general space of the lobby where the crew was standing and Gloria was sitting. They watched the security supervisor arrive. They watched him speak to Carroll and cross to Gloria and hand her something and leave. They watched Gloria make phone calls one after another, each one ending clearly without the connection she was seeking. They watched her stand up and walk to the crew and speak to them. They watched the carts being loaded back into the van. They watched Gloria follow her crew out through the lobby door. The footage ran for 31 minutes. When it ended, the room held its quiet for a moment longer. Then the board chair looked at Gloria. He looked at her the way someone looks at a person they are about to say something to that they cannot unsay, something that marks a line in a record. He said, "Ms. Watkins, I would like to apologize to you directly and on behalf of this board and this building's management. What occurred last evening was unacceptable in every respect. I want to be clear that your company's documentation, your authorization, and your professional standing with this building have never been in question. The failure last night was not yours." The legal representative was writing again. Faster this time. The board voted on the contract renewal. It was unanimous. The rate was increased. The increase was not a symbolic gesture. It was calibrated to the actual scope of service, a correction that had been noted as overdue in the previous renewal cycle, and that was now being executed with the additional context of what the footage had shown. It took 4 minutes. The board chair said, "We will be referring Officer Carroll's conduct to the security oversight vendor this morning." He said it as a statement, not a question. He said it looking at the legal representative, who nodded. Gloria thanked the board. She put her notes back in her briefcase. She closed it. She stood for a moment with the briefcase in her hand and looked at the room. Not with triumph, not with the expression of someone who has just won something, with the expression of someone who has done what needed to be done and is now ready to move to the next thing on the list. She walked to the conference room door. She opened it. She walked out. The security vendor that managed Carroll's placement at One Commerce Center received the referral within the hour. The building's management company had it on the formal record before noon. The vendor opened a review that afternoon and pulled Carroll's complete incident history, every posting, every complaint, every documented interaction that had generated a record in the 3 years he had been placed through their firm. There were 2 prior complaints, both from black service workers at commercial buildings. Both dismissed at the time, dismissed not because they were unfounded, but because the people who had filed them had not had what Gloria Watkins had. They had not had access to the building's camera system. They had not had a board meeting at 8 a.m. the next morning in the same lobby. They had not had 14 years of documentation and a company license and a contract in the security desk drawer. They had filed their complaints into the administrative mechanism, and the administrative mechanism had found insufficient grounds to proceed, which in this context meant insufficient grounds to inconvenience the officer being complained about. The pattern was now substantiated, not by the complaints alone, but by the footage and the context and the 14-year record of a vendor whose credentials were beyond any question Carroll had raised. The building terminated his contract at One Commerce Center. The security vendor suspended him from active placement pending the outcome of the review. The precinct, where he held a part-time reserve officer position, opened its own review. These things move with the specific slowness of institutional processes that are not incentivized to move quickly, but they moved. Carroll was eventually terminated from that role as well. He had not thought when he packed his bag at the end of his last shift at One Commerce Center and said goodnight to the incoming officer that any of this was coming. He had exercised what he understood as his authority. He had gone home. He had not thought about it again. He thought about it later. Tanya Reed was in the lobby when Gloria came down from the 3rd floor. She had not waited there specifically for that purpose. She had come back to the building to begin the delayed maintenance round. The board had cleared it with the facilities manager within 20 minutes of the meeting ending. 9 a.m. instead of 7 p.m. The same work, the same crew, the same supply carts. She was near the freight entrance running through the checklist when the elevator indicator lit up and the doors opened and Gloria walked out across the lobby. Gloria crossed to the freight entrance. She did not announce anything. She set her briefcase against the wall beside the cart. She took off her jacket and folded it over the top of the briefcase with the same care she brought to everything. She reached for the checklist on the side of the cart. Tanya looked at her. One question, no words. The specific look of someone who has known a person long enough to ask a question without using any of them. Gloria said, "Contract is renewed." Tanya looked back at the checklist. She checked the supply inventory the way she always checked it from the top shelf down methodically, not skipping anything. Gloria checked the equipment list on the tablet. They did not make a ceremony of the moment. There was work to do. They took the service elevator up together. The elevator that Gloria had been walking toward the previous evening and had not reached. The doors closed on the lobby below. The button for 2 was pressed. The elevator hummed the specific hum that Gloria had known for 14 years. She looked at the indicator above the door. Tanya looked at the checklist. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing that needed to be said that hadn't already been said in the lobby with 4 words. They began the Tuesday round at 9 a.m. on a Wednesday. The building had been cleaned before on rescheduled days. The work was unchanged. The floors were the same. The corner office on the 2nd floor had its coffee ring on the windowsill, same as always. Same spot, same circumference, the residue of a specific cup used by a specific person who would never know that it was cleaned away every week by the same company they would vote to renew that morning. Gloria's crew wiped it away without noting it the way they had been wiping it away for over a decade. The building management company, reviewing what had occurred and its resolution, included the sequence, the documentation, the incident log, the footnote, and the opening remarks about the lobby camera footage, the composure maintained throughout in an internal protocol update for their facilities management team. A reference case. Not by name specifically, though the people in the room when the board chair made the apology would remember whose name was on the contract. The sequence itself was entered into the company's training materials as an example of how a documented denial of access situation could be navigated and resolved through precision and preparation rather than confrontation. Gloria did not know this when it happened. She found out 2 years later when the facilities manager mentioned it in passing during a contract renewal meeting. She said, "That's good to know." She moved on to the next agenda item. In her office at the Watkins Professional Services warehouse, there was a wall, not a decorated wall, not a wall with certificates or plaques, though those existed and were kept in folders in the filing cabinet. This was a plain wall with a handwritten log, a running record she had kept since the end of the first year of the company when she had decided that the work needed a physical record somewhere that wasn't a spreadsheet or a digital file. Each building she held a contract with had its name written in a neat column on the left side. Beside each name was the year the contract had started and the current rate. Nothing else. No commentary, no decoration. One commerce center was near the top of the column. 14 years. And then when she came back to the office on Wednesday afternoon after the 9 a.m. round had been completed, after the building's floors had been cleaned to the same standard they were cleaned to every week, she took out her pen. She wrote the renewed rate in small numbers beside the building's name. Precise numbers. Correct numbers. She capped the pen and looked at the wall for a moment with the steady quality of someone who is noting something rather than celebrating it. Then she went back to her desk. 18 years. 23 employees. The Tuesday evening rounds at one commerce center, which she still worked herself every week. The company logo on her business card, designed by a professional graphic designer in year 8 of the business. Precise and clean, the kind of logo that had been developed through a deliberate process by a person who understood that how something looks reflects the care that went into making it. She had been 61 years old when Carroll looked at that card and said what he said. She thought sometimes in the quiet moments between tasks about what she had understood in that lobby, not about Carroll specifically, not about his particular smallness or his particular certainty about things he had not verified. About the thing she had built and what it required of her to protect it. Not argument, not force. Something quieter than both of those things, and in many ways considerably harder. The discipline of precision in the face of contempt. The patience to let what is documented speak for what is true. The decision to enter the next room with the same composure you entered the last one, regardless of what happened in the last one. The understanding arrived at over 18 years of building something in spaces that did not always welcome her. That the most devastating response to dismissal is to walk into the same room the next morning and let what you have built do the talking. There is a thing that happens when someone has spent 18 years building something real. The building becomes visible in how they move through the world. It shows in the way a person enters a room not with arrogance, which is borrowed authority, and not with performance, which is borrowed confidence, but with the specific settled gravity of someone who knows exactly what they have made and what it cost to make it. You cannot fake that gravity. You can imitate confidence for an hour. You cannot imitate the weight of 18 years. Gloria Watkins walked into one commerce center at 7:45 in the morning in a charcoal business suit, and a man who had spent the previous evening blocking her path from an elevator held the door for her and said good morning. She said thank you. She walked to the elevator and pressed 3. The doors closed. What she carried into that elevator, what she brought into that third-floor conference room, what she placed on the presenter's table in a leather briefcase and opened without hurry, was not just a contract renewal proposal. It was 18 years of work that had made itself undeniable. It was 23 employees whose hours she had confirmed at midnight. It was 14 years of Tuesday evenings in a building that had handed itself over to her care and trusted her with it. It was the incident log she had opened at 7:08 p.m. in a lobby chair and filled with precise, factual language while a man performed contempt for an empty room. It was the footnote she had added to a presentation at 10 p.m. in her kitchen while the rest of the city was asleep. It walked into the room. It sat down. It waited. It did not need to argue. If this story moved you, subscribe to this channel. There are more stories like this one where what someone built over decades walked into a room and did not need to argue for itself. Stories about people who kept building when the building was hard, who kept their composure when composure was the hardest thing to keep, who documented precisely and waited patiently and let the work speak when the room was not ready to listen. Stories about what 18 years looks like when it walks through a door. Subscribe and stay with us. There are more stories like this one. There will always be more stories like this one.